Let's talk energy. The broader the bar, the greater the volume of crude that comes out of this or that place. The taller the bar, the greater the cost of producing it. Now, this is data from roughly 10 years ago. U.S. shale is the light blue bar on the left. Back then, it was about 4 million barrels a day, which is, important, but not like, oh, look out. The United States was using 20 million barrels per day of crude at the time. So it moved the needle, but it didn't really change the game. But since then, we've had changes in how we manage finance and water and drilling and data, and this is where they were at the dawn of the coronavirus crisis. We had achieved net energy independence in the United States. Now, it's fallen back a little bit, but we're really only about 1 million barrels a day off of where we were at this point. And we have a frac log that's about half that. So honestly, from a functional point of view, we're pretty much back to where we were. What this means is the United States now has a source of crude independent of anything that happens in the entire Eastern or Southern hemispheres. And the US president has the capacity to shut off oil exports to keep it all bottled up in the North American market. We, as a country, will never have an energy crisis again, or at least until we run out of shale, which is like a century in the future. Now, there's more going on here just than crude. There's also natural gas. This is what I like to call the checkbook map. It's just the world at night. Every concentration of lights is a place where there's a lot of people who can pay their power bill. This is the most important city in the history of civilization. Marshalltown, Iowa, that's where I'm from. This is Bismarck, North Dakota, and this is not a giant block party. It's the Bakken oil fields. It's a shale project, and it's lit up because of a problem with transport. Now, oil's a liquid. You can put it into any sort of container. It doesn't have to be sealed, doesn't have to be pressurized, and you can move it almost any way you want. Barge, rail car, truck, you name it. But you can't do that with natural gas. You have to have a pressurized system to gather it, to transport it, and to get it to a point of use. And that point of use has to process it at the pace that it comes in because storage is almost impossible. It disperses otherwise. Now, here in the US, we have the world's largest and most distributed and most redundant natural gas system in the world. But we can't keep up with the associated natural gas that's coming up out of the shale oil fields as a byproduct. So it gets dumped into the system at below cost. Based on whose numbers you're using, upwards of half of the natural gas produced in this country is sold at a loss. Well, what can't you do with the bottomless supply of the world's base material? Well, we burn a lot of it for power, and it's now our number one electricity source. But we've also rejiggered our entire chemical system, and this is where you guys come in. If you start at the bottom left with crude oil, you refine that to get something called naphtha, and eventually you use that to make daughter products. If you start at the bottom right, the light gray bar with natural gas, you crack it to get ethylene, and you use that to make daughter products. Now, normally, you would only use natural gas to make this relatively narrow product set because it's difficult to work with. There's a 5-to-1 price difference between natural gas and oil normally, but not here. In the US, because of the shale projects, the price differential is closer to 2-to-1. So we have retooled our entire petrochemical system to run on the stuff wherever we can. Why does this matter to you? This is fertilizer, and this is pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Good luck growing citrus without those things. Which means in the United States, not only are we oil self-sufficient, so we don't have to worry about prices for crude or diesel getting jacked up. The things that we use for our inputs in everyday life, and agriculture in particular, actually use a different feedstock that the rest of the world doesn't have access to. So the next time there's a global energy crisis, and there will be one, not only did the United States not experience the sort of shortages and price increases that the rest of the world is just going to have to get used to, we use a different feedstock for the stuff that makes our systems run in the first place. So you can have stable prices for all your inputs here, where everyone else, it's high and erratic. Now, there is a problem, and that's agriculture. Now, the United States is largely divorced from the rest of the world's economic systems, but agriculture is the exemption because you guys are just too damn productive. Roughly 1 out of every 3 to 1 out of every 4 calories that we produce, it has to be exported because we just can't consume it all. Which means that if other countries want to target us in trade talks, they always go after agriculture because it's the only point of vulnerability. What I've done here is I've laid out a number of products by the percent that has to be exported. And as a rule, the further you are to the left, the bigger the problem. But there's some subcategories here that are worth calling out. Anything that is in red is a specialty product that has a very geographic concentration of where it is exported to, which makes it incredibly vulnerable to trade pressures independent of anything else. These are ones that I'm really worried about. Anything in gray is a product where the overcapacity that is built up in the American system has taken years, and the correction to an export volume that's a little bit more realistic is going to be really, really painful. You'll notice that pork specifically is in both categories. And then, of course, we've got citrus in the yellow. Fairly low on the scale. Not generally considered a specialty product. Now, that doesn't mean that your future is painless. It doesn't mean that you're immune to trade pressure. But it does suggest that the economic and structural pain that you will face in this transition period is going to be manageable. Because if you think forward to a world where supply chains break down, where diesel prices go up, where fertilizer is harder to get, most producers in most of the world, in most crops, are going to face extraordinary challenges. But not in the United States. Our entire supply chain runs on different things, and it's domestic. So our output is going to be stable, assuming that the market supports it. In your industry, I think you're going to be okay. I want to talk about some of your competitors and some of your target markets. This is simply the major exporters in terms of sheer bulk. Oranges first, then soft citrus, and finally lemons. The countries that really matter moving forward, I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about the deltas, the places where the changes are going to be really robust and a little nightmarish based on your point of view. For those of you who are in the world of lemons, I probably have the least good news for you because your primary competitors, Argentina, Chile, South Africa, they're probably going to be sticking around for a while. They don't face nearly the geopolitical pressures of most of the players. But if you are in soft citrus or oranges, your primary concern is Egypt and Spain. And the short version is they're screwed. We'll fill that out a little bit here near the end. But your primary competitors are probably going to vanish from the market. Let's start with the big boy, of course, and that's China, which is hoovering up whatever food they can get from anywhere. Now, there are 30-odd reasons why I don't think China is going to be a unified nation state just 10 years from now. We've already talked about demographics a little bit, but let's talk about strategy. The problem that the Chinese face are the islands off the coast: Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore. It's not so much that they're all anti-China or that they're US allies or that they get along well with one another, although all of that is true. The problem is that they form a barrier between China and the rest of the world. The Chinese call it the first island chain. And there is no period in Chinese history where the Chinese have ever been able to penetrate the chain in a commercial manner and sustain any sort of economic integration with the wider world, with one exception. Today, under American strategic sponsorship. The American Navy is probably 30, maybe 35 times as powerful as the Chinese Navy, and it can sail the ocean blue. China only has about 50 ships that can sail more than 1,000 miles from the coast. They can't maintain the trade lanes that they would need to in order to maintain their economic profile without American active assistance. So all the US has to do, if the goal is to destroy China as a country, is go home.